Hey everybody, so the last 3 weeks we've talked about things from understanding that we are in an identity crisis to looking at what an identity really is and what it means, and then going forward to last week's message that Derek gave. And so this week we're getting into, okay, now that I understand what identity is, where it comes from, that I was in an identity crisis or I currently am in an identity crisis, where are some next steps to take? What do I do next, and what happens next? So that's what we're going to be diving into tonight. So tonight, before we get into the message, the scripture we're going to be going off of is Luke 19, 1 through 10. And it's the story of this guy named Zacchaeus. And so Jesus is coming to town, and Zacchaeus is a tax collector. And if you know anything about tax collectors from biblical times, mostly considered not great people. They took as much money as they wanted to, whenever they wanted to, from whoever they wanted to. And so this guy, who was known by the town to be this tax collector guy that people didn't really like, hears that Jesus is coming, and he climbs a tree. The Bible kind of takes a jab at him, and because he's got small stature in some versions, it means he's short. But he climbed a tree, saw Jesus coming, and Jesus actually calls out to Zacchaeus and invites him down. He really says, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." And so Jesus goes and stays with him and talks to him, and Zacchaeus stays there, and it says this in verses 8 through 10 right here. It says, "And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, 'Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold.'" So he's going to give it back 4 times what he took. And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come into this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." And so this, in a short kind of paraphrase, is Jesus comes to town. This guy who's a tax collector, who not many people like probably, climbs a tree, sees Jesus, meets him, then all of a sudden talks to him, has a conversation, and says, "Hey, I've done wrong, I've messed up in my life, but I'm going to repay these people. And not only am I going to repay them, I'm going to repay them multiple times what I owe them and what I took from them." And so it really is this story of this guy going from completely lost to found to taking steps forward in the right direction. And it's a really neat story, and I think that a lot of us can kind of learn from it in life, because I think that a lot of us like to picture ourselves as the Zacchaeus who's giving away all of the money. I think that as we read the Bible, it's really easy to do that, to put ourselves kind of in the hero's shoes and say, "Yeah, I did that. I would totally be the Good Samaritan on the side of the road. I would totally be the Zacchaeus who gives away all the stuff." But probably most of us resonate more with the Zacchaeus who's climbing a tree, because they hear that a guy is coming to town because he loves people and forgives people. I think a lot of us probably resonate with that as hey, maybe you've listened to this series and your identity was in money like Zacchaeus, or was in a job, or was in a sports team, or was in a relationship, and now you've kind of seen Jesus and got that glimpse of him, and now you're like, okay, now where do I go? Now that I have this relationship. And it's really cool to see what Zacchaeus does, because he gives away and gives back all of the money. And I'm not saying that you should go into your brother's room and shatter his piggy bank, and go into your parents' room where they keep their money and take it all and go give it to the poor. Please don't do that. At least don't tell them James sent you if you do that. But what I am saying is that not only does Zacchaeus meet Jesus, but he has a complete life change when that happens. He doesn't go back to his old ways. He doesn't take more money. He doesn't go back to what he was doing. He changes the way he was living his life. He makes an alteration. And that thing, not only do you do that regularly, if you change sports, you do that, and you say, okay, well, my life was this way, now it's not. But when you find a new identity, when you have a new foundation that describes who you are, you live different. And with Christianity, I think that a lot of us can get saved and live life, and all of a sudden we get to a point where something bad happens, or something happens that we didn't want to happen, and now we're like, well, where do we go? Well, like I thought this Jesus guy was going to help me at all times. I thought this was going to be this glorious life. And I think that it comes kind of in three categories, and we'll walk through them. But the first, I think, that a group of people deals with is guilt. I think a lot of us mess up or do something, and we're like, okay, I'm guilty of this, I've sinned, and now we can't get past this wall that we've built ourselves. That's one category. The second category is saying, hey, I know Jesus died on the cross for me, so I can live however I wanted to. I can sin as much as I want, I can do as much as I want, I can do whatever I want, and now I don't have to worry about it because I know Jesus died for me. And I think that there's a third category of just kind of like lost in between. Of like, okay, I'm supposed to live like Jesus, but I'm imperfect, so what do I do now? And so these three categories are very specific, but they all deal with the identity crisis. They all deal with, okay, I know Jesus, or maybe I don't know Jesus, and what do I do? What are some steps? And so Zacchaeus does this thing, and this is so cool. He turns from what he was doing to find a new beginning. Not only does he meet Jesus, but he shifts his livelihood away from what he was doing to something new. He gives back. He becomes a giver. Instead of a taker, he becomes a giver. Instead of someone who just takes, gets fed all the time, turns into a servant. And I know that you guys probably do not have that much money. Some of y'all might not even be able to drive. But what you guys do have is time to serve people. And that can look like serving in church, like serving in tech booth, serving with the volunteer team, or it could look like reaching your community and loving your community. Because like you see, like this is so cool. You see Jesus come into this town, and like he knows what's going to happen, but realistically, he's just walking through a town. Like if we see a guy walking through a town, like sure, that guy probably has purpose there, but like it's not like you wouldn't think it'd be like anything of magnitude, like gonna change a tax collector's life. But Jesus takes this kind of ordinary situation and turns it into something great in Zacchaeus' life. But that only happens when Zacchaeus is willing to take that step, when Zacchaeus is willing to make that move. And I think that a lot of us can kind of resonate with the broken Zacchaeus here, turning into the guy who now he's like a model citizen, gives back, does stuff for the poor, like helps people. And I think a lot of my life, Zacchaeus dealt with taking money. Zacchaeus dealt with, okay, this person, I can take this from them and I can keep this for myself and make myself better. And a large part of my life, I didn't necessarily do that with money, but I think that I did it with love. Like I would look for a relationship to give me that kind of, okay, I'm worth something now. Or I would like look to a girlfriend or someone, to flirt back with, to kind of give me like that stamp of approval of, hey, okay, you're worth something. Like there's a value in you. And you can do that with anything. You can do it with sports. You can do it with Instagram, with likes or comments. You can do it with TikTok. You can do it with plays. You can do it with work, anything. And people live a lot of their lives, unfortunately, searching for those things that don't really hold weight. And I lived my life so long looking for love. And I went to a church camp that we had here at Highlands, and it wasn't an Amplify. I think it was called Impact. And it was like pretty much leading a vacation Bible school for these neighborhood kids who were really unfortunate, didn't have a lot of money. And I made best friends with this kid named Nathan that week. And Nathan was a great guy, incredible young man. I think he was in 5th grade when I met him. And he came down, and so every day I kind of bonded with Nathan. That was the summer that the whip and the nay-nay were a big thing. And so me and Nathan whipped and nay-nayed the whole camp. We taught the dance to all the other kids. We had a blast. And Nathan came from a really poor household. I mean, it was poor. He had holes in his shoes, holes in all of his shirts, holes in his jeans, like every piece of clothing. But there was one thing that you noticed about Nathan when you talked to him and when you kind of hung out with him for a long period of time, is we brought food to the camp every time we went there. And it was a poor neighborhood, brought food to the camp, and these kids would like swarm to the food. But Nathan would get his box, because they came in like styrofoam boxes, And they would go around, or not they, Nathan by himself, would go around to every other kid and volunteer there and say, hey, are you hungry? You can have my food. And he would he would try to give you his food. Like, even though you knew that, like, I don't know what he was eating or how much he could eat or what was going on, but he would always try to give away what really he needed most. And that kind of love, like, that rocked my world. At the end of the camp, after hanging out with them, he came up, they did a teaching on baptism, and so they were like, hey, does anyone want to get baptized? And Nathan rose his hand, and I was like, oh, hey, that's awesome. And he came up to the youth pastor at the time, and he was like, hey, I want James to baptize me. And I was like, I'm like a junior in high school, dude. I don't know what you want. Like, what do I even say? And so I asked the youth pastor, and he was like, he told me this stuff to say, and he said one thing. He said, make sure he goes all the way underwater. Like, just make sure, like, water covers everything. And so we get down in this, like, shallow creek, like, it's, like, got bottles and tires and just kind of nasty. And Nathan comes down, and so I get down there and I say the words, and I have him, like, grabbed by his shirt and, like, by his hair. And the only thing that's going through my mind is this kid has to get underwater. He has to go beneath the surface. That's the only thing they told me. So I get down there, and he, like, starts going down, so I'm not pulling. And all of a sudden, he gets down to, like, where it's, like, halfway in and halfway out. And the dude just, like, stops and freezes. And I'm like, oh no. So I just, like, grab his shirt and his hair and just, like, yank him under real quick and throw him up. Everyone starts, like, cheering and clapping and all that stuff. And he was the first student I ever baptized. And he, at the end of the camp the next day, came back, and we gave him, like, a bunch of toys and stuff to go home with. And he came up to me with his hands behind his back like this. And he was like, James, I want to give you something. And I was like, oh, what's up, man? I thought it was going to be he was going to throw a rock at me or something like that. And he took out, I was, like, on the bus, he took out the biggest toy that we gave him. Like, the number one, like, probably the most expensive one, the biggest toy that we gave. He said, I want you to have this and remember me by it. And it was such a moment of someone who really needs something, like, really needs it, and just, like, doesn't have money for it, but is willingly giving it away. And man, like, it made me look at my life so hard, because I was wanting love from something else that wasn't God. I was wanting this passion that I couldn't find anywhere. I was wanting and desiring this thing that I knew God had, but I was like, I can get it easier from a relationship or something like that. And I sat there and said, man, a 5th grader can get that through his head, but I can't. A 5th grader knows what it means to give. Someone who needed something more than anything. Zacchaeus, a tax collector. Nathan, a 5th grader. Needed something, had it, and then chose to give it away. And then the obvious example is Jesus. Had everything, the Son of God, but chooses to give it away on the cross. And listen, to take the next step that we're talking about today, to take that next step, this is so good. To take that next step, you have to love others the way Jesus loves you. You have to love desperately. Love, man, that should be a t-shirt. That's to love desperately. You guys can all picture that one person in your school, because it's usually around 1 or 2 people, that really loves people, that really is there for people, who's laughing all the time, who's around people, who's caring for people. What if we as Christians really love desperately like Jesus? What if that's what this whole identity thing is about, is finding a foundation so that we can share with others the light of the world? That we can make this not only something that we talk about, but something that we live. So that's my action step for you guys. It's not really something simple like you have to do A, B, C, and D and you'll be good. But my action step, really go out and love people. And just see the difference that it makes in those around you. So if you guys will pray with me really quick, I think we're good to close out. Dear God, thank you so much for loving us. Thank you so much for all these students. God, thank you for the story of Zacchaeus. And thank you that we are Zacchaeus. But God, we know that you gave your son to die for us. God, help us take those steps to loving you better and to love our communities around us better. Because, God, we know that people need it right now. Communities are lost, lonely, people are lonely, families are probably being torn apart right now because all these arguments going on in houses, God, but you can be the one to step in and say, hey, love is greater than that. No darkness can drive out light. No hate can drive out love. God, thank you so much for loving us, and we love you too. Amen. Hey, thank you guys so much for tuning in with us again this week. I hope you guys have really enjoyed this message series. I know that I have. Listen, just go out, and now that you've found an identity, now that you know what it is, go out and love somebody. Send that text message you're thinking about. Make that phone call that you're thinking about. Tell that person you care about. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.